Robert Pirsig possessed a mind that worked too fast for the systems meant to contain it. At 9 years old, his IQ tested at 170. He enrolled to study biochemistry at age 15, but he soon found a fatal flaw in the traditional scientific method. He realized that for any given set of data, the number of rational hypotheses was actually unlimited. Science wasn't a path to a single truth. It was a factory for endless complexity. Pirsig abandoned science for philosophy, eventually landing a job teaching rhetoric at Montana State. He formulated a hyper-intellectual alter ego he called Phaedrus. Phaedrus waged an uncompromising war against the rigid, unyielding academic hierarchy, an institution he famously labeled the Church of Reason. This war began with a simple question to his students: what is quality in writing? His attempt to define that word became an all-consuming obsession. He spent years spiraling into a mushroom cloud of thought, withdrawing from his family to bridge the gap between Western logic and Eastern mysticism. Eventually, the weight of the endless intellectual pursuit crushed him, leaving him in a severe state of catatonic schizophrenia. In the early 1960s, a court ordered a permanent solution to his instability: 28 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy. By November 1963, as a shocked nation mourned the death of President Kennedy, Pirsig was undergoing a different kind of erasure. The high-voltage current through his brain effectively liquidated the Phaedrus persona. The brilliant, uncompromising mind was on. He emerged a subdued, conforming man, remembering only vague, terrifying shadows, learning to play the normal father. In July 1968, this sane version of Pirsig loaded up a 1964 Honda Super Hawk motorcycle. He was joined by his 11-year-old son, Chris, for a 17-day journey from Minnesota to the California coast. Pirsig viewed the trip as a chance to finally connect with a son who barely knew him. But the physical road began to act as a trigger. As they rode west, the landscapes of his previous life flashed by. These old haunts began to summon the ghost of Phaedrus back to the surface. To manage the rising pressure of these memories, Pirsig spent his nights in dark campgrounds drafting a manuscript about his fractured identity. He worked from 2 until 6 every morning, fueled by a desperate need to organize his thoughts. That manuscript would be rejected 121 times before a single editor saw its value. The motorcycle trip became a desperate race against his own psychology. He had to keep the machine moving across the wide open plains, because if he stopped for too long, he would have to face the ghost of the man the doctors thought they had destroyed. Pirsig's writing companions, John and Sylvia, approached the world through a romantic lens. They loved the aesthetic of the ride, the wind, the speed, and the scenery, but they were repelled by the machine itself, viewing the greasy reality of motorcycle maintenance as an ugly intrusion on their experience. Pirsig operated on a classical level. To him, the motorcycle was a beautiful system of underlying mechanical logic. He believed that understanding the machine and maintaining it with precision was the only way to truly be in control of the journey. John and Sylvia were actually afraid of their own motorcycle, treating the technology they relied on as a hostile alien force. Pirsig saw this fear as the crack that divides Western culture into 2 incompatible halves: a world where we use tools we do not understand and rely on systems we do not trust. This disconnect creates an alienated society. To Pirsig, ignoring the inner workings of your technology doesn't make you free. It makes you a passive passenger in your own life, perpetually at the mercy of things you refuse to understand. Pirsig described the loss of enthusiasm that occurs during a repair as a gumption sap. If you are fixing a bike and you strip a screw, the physical setback triggers a feedback loop of frustration. Your energy drains away, and all forward progress on the machine stops. The exact same feedback loop applies to the human mind. Phaedrus had fallen into a psychological gumption trap, applying such extreme, uncompromising logic to the world that he stripped his own psyche. The effort to define reality with total precision had stalled his ability to live within it. He proposed a resolution through a concept he called quality. Quality is the event where the observer and the observed are no longer separate. It exists in the moment before we divide the world into subjects and objects, or art and science. Quality is an active practice. Fixing the motorcycle requires a mechanic to integrate cold, classical knowledge with a romantic, genuine care for the work. When you care about the machine, the division between you and the engine disappears. The trip reached its climax as father and son hit the California coast. The landscape was obscured by a dense fog, matching the mounting tension between the two riders. Chris began to show signs of the same emotional withdrawal and psychotic distress that had once destroyed his father. The 11-year-old was spiraling, and the quiet, sane version of Pirsig had no way to reach him. Pirsig realized that his silence was the problem. By hiding his past and playing the role of a conforming post-ECT father, he had cut himself off from his son. To save Chris, he would have to stop pretending the ghost of Phaedrus was dead. Standing on the foggy cliffs, he finally spoke. He stopped the internal war and allowed his past insanity to surface, revealing his history and his struggle to Chris. He bridged the emotional gap by finally being honest about his own fragmented mind. By embracing the darkest, most uncompromising parts of himself, Pirsig integrated his past and present. He stopped being a role player and became the whole father his son needed. The fog eventually lifted. The journey ended, and that 121 times rejected manuscript finally found a publisher. When Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance hit bookstores in 1974, it became a global sensation. It sold over 5 million copies. The book resonated with a generation that felt alienated by the coldness of modern technology and was searching for a way to find meaning in an increasingly mechanical world. Pirsig's ultimate lesson was that we don't have to choose between science and art. We repair our own humanity by engaging with the physical world through mindful, intentional care. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance brought him sudden celebrity, but that massive success became a cage. The intense public spotlight threatened the fragile mental stability he had fought for years to regain. His marriage to his wife Nancy began to disintegrate, and the anxiety of losing his mind to another breakdown returned. To survive, he needed to sever his ties to land. He traded the dusty highways of the American West for the cold, isolating expanse of the Atlantic coast. By 1975, he was living aboard a small sailboat, navigating the Hudson River. Drifting past the scrap heaps of the modern world, he set out to write an ambitious second book called Lila. The famous motorcycle trip had been a desperate effort to keep his own mind intact. Out on the water, he shifted his focus to how a person actually exists alongside the rest of humanity. Below deck, Pirsig spent his days mapping out a total philosophical system. He called it the Metaphysics of Quality, an attempt to build a unified theory explaining everything from cellular biology to human morality. This diagram illustrates his core concept, that reality is divided into two interacting forces. We have static quality, the rigid grid, representing the stable rules and structures necessary for everyday life. Then dynamic quality, the fluid waves, representing the unpatterned edge of evolution that constantly disrupts the grid to push life forward. Watching the base of this pyramid form, we see Pirsig's first two layers of static quality. At the very bottom sits the inorganic level, the physical matter of the universe. Built right on top of that is the biological tier, where basic physical needs and instincts take hold. As the glowing arrow cuts upward, the structure completes with the social and intellectual tiers. Pirsig argued that morality is the struggle of a higher evolutionary pattern to overcome a lower one, like human intellect successfully reforming an unjust social institution. Pirsig positioned values as objective components of the universe, treating them as the actual bedrock from which both subjects and objects emerge. Pinning down these definitions gave him peace. The rational, philosophizing side of his brain finally had a framework to coexist with the everyday man, creating a mental shield against the chaos that had previously driven him into the hospital. By November 1979, Pirsig had solidified his grand theory. After decades of mental torment and restless wandering, he had engineered a quiet, stable life. Then his 22-year-old son, Chris, the boy he took on that cross-country motorcycle trip to protect, was fatally stabbed during a random mugging. The attack happened on a busy city street, right outside the San Francisco Zen Center where Chris had been living and studying. A philosopher who spent his entire adult life organizing the universe into a logical structure was suddenly faced with the completely meaningless destruction of his own child. The sudden vacuum left by Chris's death became a brutal stress test for Pirsig's framework, forcing his abstract metaphysics to confront a reality that felt entirely devoid of quality. To survive the loss, Pirsig applied his own framework to his grief. He began to separate the physical, biological body that died on the pavement from the actual essence of the boy he raised. This network of glowing nodes visualizes Pirsig's conclusion. He reasoned that Chris existed as an intersection of intellect, spirit, and love, an enduring pattern of quality that remained even after his biological life ended. Because Chris existed as a pattern, that pattern could continue to operate in the world. It directly inspired Pirsig and his second wife to bring a daughter, Nell, into their family. Pirsig spent his final decades living quietly in Maine and sailing the Atlantic. He had faced the ultimate test of his own mind and held it together. A moment of wonder. He left behind a realization that the maintenance of our machines, our boats, and our philosophies are, in the end, the maintenance of the human spirit.